Welcome the rare gems. Sometimes the clearest way to understand a person is to watch how they react when they can no longer control the story. If you are a Sigma female, you may have experienced something strange in your relationships with difficult people. You were not necessarily trying to fight anyone. You simply started noticing patterns, questioning behavior, and making decisions that felt right for you. Yet, somehow, your calmness was called arrogance, your boundaries were called disrespect, and your decision to walk away was treated like a personal attack. That is where this topic becomes uncomfortable. Narcissistic people do not always perceive you as you actually are. They often interpret you through their own needs, expectations, and desire for control. What they see in you can be very different from what everyone else sees. And if you have ever wondered why certain people became strangely reactive, possessive, dismissive, or obsessed with understanding your decisions, there may be more beneath the surface than you realize. Being a Sigma does not mean being perfect. It means having the courage to think independently, learn from experience, and remain true to yourself even when others misunderstand you. Stay with me until the end, because these 12 points may help you understand yourself and other people on a much deeper level. And when we finish, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us which point connected with you most, and subscribe to join our growing community. Let's dive deeper. The rare gems. Number 1. They may become obsessed with whether she has replaced them. Not necessarily because they genuinely want the relationship back. Sometimes it is about comparison. Is someone else treating her better? One of the strangest things that can happen after a Sigma female walks away from a difficult relationship is that the other person may become unusually interested in what happens next in her life. Who is she talking to now? Is she happier? Has she met someone better? Does she look more confident? Has her life improved since they separated? At first glance, this may look like genuine concern or even a desire to reconnect. But sometimes it is less about missing the woman and more about what her life says about them. For a narcissistic person, her progress can become a private comparison. If she looks happier without them, they may wonder why. If she becomes successful, they may question whether they underestimated her. If another person treats her with kindness, respect, and consistency, that can quietly challenge the story they once told themselves about her. Consider a woman who spent years being told that she was too difficult, too sensitive, or impossible to please. She finally leaves, rebuilds her confidence, starts doing better financially, takes care of herself, and becomes genuinely peaceful. She does not announce any of this to her former partner. She does not post pictures, hoping they will notice. She simply continues living. Yet somehow they keep checking. That is the irony. She may not even realize there is a competition happening because she never entered one. This is where the Sigma mindset becomes important. A Sigma female can eventually reach a point where her life stops being a response to someone else's behavior. She is not becoming happier to prove a point. She is becoming healthier because she finally understands what she deserves. And that is something worth remembering. Your growth does not need an audience. You do not have to defeat anyone to prove that leaving was right. Sometimes the greatest evidence that you made the right decision is simply that your life became peaceful again. Let that be your wisdom. Build a life so meaningful that you no longer need to know who is watching it. Number 2. They perceive her ability to leave as a threat to their story about her. If they believe she was dependent on them, her departure creates a contradiction. People can become more uncomfortable with your transformation than they ever were with your resistance. Sometimes the most unsettling thing a difficult person can experience is not your anger. It is your ability to leave, rebuild, and continue your life without returning to the same emotional battlefield. A narcissistic person may have created a particular story about the Sigma female. Perhaps they convinced themselves that she needed them. Maybe they believed she was too emotionally attached to leave. Maybe they assumed she would eventually become tired, forgive everything, and come back. As long as she remained within that pattern, their story about her appeared correct. Then she leaves, and something changes. She starts making decisions without consulting them. She becomes more careful about who gets access to her life. She stops explaining every choice. She rebuilds friendships, focuses on work, develops new interests, or simply enjoys the peace she once thought she could never have. That creates a contradiction. The woman they thought could not survive without them is surviving. The woman they described as weak is recovering. The woman they expected to return is moving forward. Take a woman who spent years being told, "You will never find anyone who understands you like I do." After leaving, she does not immediately find another relationship. She simply learns to enjoy her own company, becomes financially stronger, takes better care of herself, and sleeps peacefully at night. That alone can challenge the entire story someone created about her. This is why her transformation can be more disturbing than her anger. Anger still creates a connection. If she is constantly arguing, proving her point, or demanding an explanation, there is still emotional involvement. But peace tells a different story. Peace says, "This chapter is finished." For a Sigma female, this is an important lesson. You do not have to destroy someone's reputation to prove that they misunderstood you. Sometimes your life becomes the clearest answer. Let people keep their version of the story if they need it. Your responsibility is not to correct every false description of you. Your responsibility is to become so grounded in who you are that their version no longer determines how you live. Number 3, they may try to reintroduce the old version of her. This is one of the most overlooked dynamics. When she changes, they may not interact with who she is now. They interact with who she used to be. Some people are not trying to understand who you have become. They are trying to bring back the version of you they already know how to handle. This is one of the most overlooked things that can happen when a Sigma female changes. She may have grown emotionally, mentally, and practically, but someone from her past may continue treating her as though nothing has changed. They bring up the old jokes that used to make her uncomfortable. They mention embarrassing moments from years ago. They remind her of mistakes she made when she was younger. They use familiar words, familiar attitudes, and familiar emotional triggers, almost as if they are reaching for an old button and expecting the same reaction. But the button may no longer work. Why? Because people sometimes become comfortable with the version of you that existed inside their influence. They know how that woman reacted. They know what could make her feel guilty. They know what could make her angry. They know what would make her explain herself for 20 minutes. Then she changes. She becomes more thoughtful about her reactions. She recognizes manipulation faster. She no longer rushes to defend every accusation. She has learned from experiences that once confused her. For example, a woman who once argued whenever someone questioned her character may eventually respond with a simple, "You are entitled to your opinion," and continue with her day. That response can be surprisingly powerful because the old argument required her participation. This is where the Sigma female needs wisdom. Growth does not always require announcing that you have changed. Sometimes the clearest evidence is that the same behavior no longer produces the same reaction from you. Someone may return expecting the old version of you and discover that she is gone. Not because she became cold, not because she became heartless, because she became conscious And when you become conscious of your patterns, other people lose the ability to automatically pull you back into them. So if someone keeps treating you according to who you used to be, remember this: you do not have to keep introducing your new self to someone committed to meeting your old one. Sometimes the healthiest response is simply to live differently. Number 4, they perceive her silence as a challenge, not peace. A narcissistic person often assumes silence means something is happening underneath: anger, insecurity, fear, or a hidden desire to reconnect. Sometimes silence is not a sign that someone has nothing to say. It is a sign that they have finally decided there is nothing left to discuss. This is where the Sigma female can become deeply misunderstood by a narcissistic person. Her silence may be interpreted as anger, hidden pain, manipulation, or even an attempt to make someone chase her. But sometimes the truth is much simpler. She has already processed what happened, reached her conclusion, and decided that another argument will not change anything. That can be extremely uncomfortable for someone who is used to getting emotional reactions from other people. Think about a woman who used to explain herself every time someone accused her of something. She would defend her intentions, answer every question, and spend hours trying to make the other person understand. Eventually, she realizes that the conversation is going nowhere. The next time the same behavior happens, she simply says, "I understand what you're saying," and stops arguing. That silence can speak louder than another 20-minute explanation. Her boundaries can create a similar reaction. A healthy person may hear, "I am not comfortable with this anymore," and adjust accordingly. But someone accustomed to having unlimited access to another person's time, attention, emotions, or forgiveness may experience that boundary as rejection. Suddenly, "No" sounds like disrespect. "I need space" sounds like punishment. "I am leaving" sounds like betrayal. But a boundary is not an attack. It is information about what someone is willing to participate in. The Sigma female needs to understand something important here. You do not have to make your boundaries harsh to make them real. You can be respectful and still be firm. You can care about someone and still decide that certain behavior has no place in your life. And if someone becomes angry simply because you have finally drawn a line, ask yourself an honest question. Are they upset because you treated them badly, or because you stopped allowing them to treat you however they wanted? That question can reveal more than any argument ever could. Sometimes your silence is not weakness. Sometimes your boundary is not cruelty. Sometimes both are simply evidence that you have finally learned where your responsibility ends. Number 5, they become obsessed with finding the real reason. She left. They may refuse to accept that the reason is simply she was finished. So they search. Sometimes the hardest explanation to accept is the one that requires no explanation at all. When a Sigma female walks away, a narcissistic person may become strangely determined to discover the real reason. They may find it difficult to accept that she simply reached a decision and became finished with the relationship. Instead, they start searching for another explanation that makes the situation easier for them to understand. Maybe there is another man. Maybe someone has influenced her. Maybe she thinks she is better than them. Maybe she wants revenge. Maybe she is pretending to be done and will eventually return. Notice what all these explanations have in common. They place the reason for her departure somewhere outside her own judgment. The possibility that can be hardest to accept is much simpler. She observed the relationship, noticed repeated patterns, thought carefully about what she was experiencing, and decided that continuing was no longer good for her. There may have been no dramatic final argument, no secret lover, no mastermind giving her advice, no carefully planned revenge. She may simply have reached her limit. Consider a woman who has repeatedly communicated the same concern for years. Nothing changes. She gives another chance, watches the same behavior return, and eventually stops participating. When she leaves, the other person may say, "Who put this idea in your head?" But perhaps nobody did. Perhaps she finally listened to herself. This is an important distinction for the Sigma female. You do not always need a spectacular reason to leave something that consistently drains your peace. Sometimes the accumulation of small disappointments tells you more than one dramatic incident ever could. People often expect decisions to come with courtroom evidence. But personal judgment does not always work that way. You can recognize that something is unhealthy for you without producing a 50-page explanation. And if someone desperately needs a different reason for your departure, let them have their theories. You know what you experienced. You know what you tolerated. You know how many times you reconsidered. And sometimes the most honest conclusion is also the simplest. You looked at the relationship carefully and decided you no longer wanted to participate in it. Number 6. They perceive her self-respect as arrogance. This is one of the nastiest distortions. A woman who refuses to tolerate disrespect can be described as proud. Sometimes people call you arrogant because they are uncomfortable with the version of you they can no longer control. One of the nastiest distortions a Sigma female can experience is having her self-respect turned into a character flaw. She refuses to tolerate disrespect, and suddenly she is called proud. She questions behavior that does not make sense, and she becomes difficult. She walks away from a situation that repeatedly hurts her, and people decide she thinks she is better than everyone else. But look closer at what is happening. Calling someone arrogant can be an easy way to avoid examining their own behavior. It is much easier to say, "She has changed," than to ask, "What happened between us that made her change?" It is easier to say, "She thinks she is too good for us," than to admit, maybe she finally realized what she was accepting was not healthy. For example, imagine a woman who used to laugh off disrespectful comments from someone close to her. She tolerated the jokes, overlooked the insults, and kept making excuses. Eventually she says, "I am not comfortable being spoken to like that anymore." Nothing about that statement is arrogant. She did not insult anyone. She did not claim superiority. She simply identified a line and decided to protect it. Yet someone who benefited from her tolerance may experience that change as an attack. This is an important lesson for the Sigma female. Self-respect does not require you to become harsh, superior, or emotionally distant. It simply means you stop confusing endurance with loyalty. You can be humble and still have standards. You can admit when you are wrong and still refuse to accept mistreatment. You can love someone deeply and still recognize that their behavior is unacceptable. And sometimes, when people accuse you of being arrogant after you establish a boundary, it is worth looking beyond the accusation and asking a more useful question. What changed in my behavior, and who benefited from the old version of me? That question can reveal a great deal, because sometimes people are not angry because you became arrogant. They are angry because you became harder to mistreat. Number 7. They see her ability to change her mind as betrayal. Some people believe that once a woman has loved them, trusted them, forgiven them, or given them access, that access should remain available indefinitely. Changing your mind does not make your past feelings fake. Sometimes it means you finally understand what those feelings were costing you. One of the most uncomfortable things a narcissistic person may struggle with is the idea that a Sigma female is allowed to change her mind. If she once loved them, trusted them, forgave them, supported them, or gave them access to her private life, they may begin to treat that history like a permanent contract. But it is not. Past intimacy does not create lifetime ownership. The fact that she once opened the door does not mean she has to keep it open forever. The fact that she once tolerated certain behavior does not mean she has agreed to tolerate it for the rest of her life. This becomes especially important when a woman grows through experience. Maybe she once forgave repeated disrespect because she believed people deserved second chances. Later, she realizes that forgiveness without changed behavior simply creates another opportunity for the same problem. So she changes her decision. Suddenly, the person who benefited from her previous generosity may accuse her of betrayal. You promised you would always be there. You used to understand me. You were not like this before. Those statements can sound emotional, but they can also reveal an unhealthy expectation that she must remain exactly the same because someone became comfortable with the older version of her. Consider a woman who once allowed her partner to read her messages because she wanted to prove she had nothing to hide. Years later, she decides that privacy matters to her. That does not automatically mean she has something to conceal. It may simply mean her understanding of a healthy relationship has matured. The Sigma female needs to understand that growth sometimes requires revisiting old decisions. You are allowed to say, "I thought differently then." You are allowed to say, "I accepted that before, but I will not accept it now." You are even allowed to say, "I loved you, but I no longer want this relationship." That is not necessarily betrayal. It is the reality of being a human being capable of learning. Your past self made decisions with the information she had at the time. Your present self has more information. Wisdom sometimes means having the courage to let the present version of you make a different choice. Number 8, they interpret her lack of explanation as hidden weakness. This is where narcissistic perception becomes particularly distorted. Silence is sometimes misunderstood because people are used to measuring strength by how much someone can argue. This is where the Sigma female can be seriously misread. When she stops explaining herself, a narcissistic person may assume she has been cornered. They may think she has no answer, that she cannot defend her position, or that she is secretly confused about what she wants. This is where the Sigma female can be seriously misread. When she stops explaining herself, a narcissistic person may assume she has been cornered. They may think she has no answer, that she cannot defend her position, or that she is secretly confused about what she wants. But there is another possibility. She has simply realized that explanation only has value when the other person is genuinely interested in understanding. There is a huge difference between someone asking, "Help me understand what happened," and someone asking questions only to find another detail to attack. The first person wants clarity. The second person may be looking for material to continue the argument. A Sigma female can eventually recognize that difference. For example, imagine she makes a decision about a relationship and explains her reasons clearly. Instead of listening, the other person challenges every sentence. "You are exaggerating. That never happened. You misunderstood me. You are too sensitive." So she explains again. The same thing happens. She explains again. Still the same response. Eventually she stops, not because she has run out of words, but because she has run out of reasons to believe more words will accomplish anything. That is an important form of emotional maturity. You do not have to answer every accusation, simply because someone demanded an answer. You do not have to correct every false assumption, and you certainly do not have to hand someone the complete map of your emotions so they can argue with every destination. You do not have to answer every accusation simply because someone demanded an answer. You do not have to correct every false assumption, and you certainly do not have to hand someone the complete map of your emotions so they can argue with every destination. This does not mean the Sigma female should refuse accountability. If she makes a mistake, she should be capable of admitting it. Strength is not pretending to be right all the time. This does not mean the Sigma female should refuse accountability. If she makes a mistake, she should be capable of admitting it. Strength is not pretending to be right all the time. The deeper wisdom is knowing the difference between accountability and endless self-defense. Sometimes the healthiest sentence is simply, "I have explained my position, and I am not going to keep arguing about it." That is not weakness. It is recognizing that communication has a limit. When someone is genuinely trying to understand you, explanation builds connection. When someone is determined to misunderstand you, explanation can become a trap, and learning the difference can save you years of unnecessary emotional exhaustion. Number 9, they perceive her discernment as suspicion. She may ask fewer questions, but notice more. People become uncomfortable when they realize you are paying attention to patterns instead of being impressed by explanations. A Sigma female may not interrogate people or constantly demand answers, but she can become remarkably observant. She notices when someone's words and actions stop matching. She remembers promises that were made and quietly watches what happens afterward. She notices a sudden change in tone, a strange reaction to a simple question, or the way someone's personality changes when they do not get what they want. This is discernment, not automatically suspicion. There is an important difference. Suspicion says, "I already believe you are guilty." Discernment says, "I am going to watch what you consistently do before deciding what I believe." That distinction matters. For example, someone might repeatedly promise to respect a woman's boundaries. Instead of arguing about whether they mean it, she watches their behavior. The first time, they apologize. The second time, they repeat it. The third time, they become angry because she noticed. At that point, she does not need another speech about intentions. The pattern has become information. This can make a narcissistic person uncomfortable because their presentation may no longer be enough to influence her perception. Charming words, dramatic apologies, impressive promises, or carefully chosen explanations lose their power when she compares them with consistent behavior. She starts asking a much more useful question. What happens after the conversation ends? Because anyone can sound sincere for 10 minutes. Character becomes clearer when there is nothing to gain from pretending. The Sigma female should also be careful here. Discernment does not mean assuming everyone is dishonest. That would simply replace naivety with cynicism. The goal is not to become suspicious of everybody. The goal is to become patient enough to let behavior provide evidence. Give people room to reveal their patterns. Watch how they treat people who cannot benefit them. Watch how they respond to disagreement. Watch whether their apology produces changed behavior. Watch what happens when they hear no. Words matter, but patterns often tell the fuller story. And when your observations begin contradicting someone's carefully constructed image, do not rush to accuse them. Stay calm. Keep watching. Sometimes, the wisest conclusion does not come from what someone says about themselves. It comes from what they repeatedly demonstrate. Number 10. They are unsettled when she stops trying to prove her innocence. This is psychologically powerful. Nothing frustrates manipulation more than realizing the person you are questioning has stopped treating your accusations as a court case. This is one of the most powerful changes a Sigma female can make. She may reach a point where she stops trying to prove that she is a good person, explain every decision, or defend herself against accusations that keep changing. A manipulative person can keep someone emotionally trapped by constantly demanding explanations. Why did you do that? That is not what happened. You are hiding something. Explain yourself. The conversation appears to be about finding the truth, but sometimes it becomes something else entirely. The woman keeps defending herself while the other person keeps moving the goalpost. She answers one accusation and another appears. She explains her intention, and her intention is questioned. She provides evidence, and suddenly the discussion becomes about something completely different. Eventually, she realizes something important. She is participating in a trial where the verdict was already decided, so she steps out of the courtroom. Consider a woman accused of ignoring someone. She explains that she was working and could not respond. The accusation changes to, "You could have found 2 minutes." She explains again. Then comes, "You are always making excuses." At some point she realizes that the conversation is no longer about understanding what happened. It is about keeping her defending herself. So she stops. Not because she has no answer, because she understands that endless defense can become a form of emotional captivity. This does not mean a Sigma female should never explain herself or accept responsibility. If she genuinely makes a mistake, maturity means acknowledging it. The difference is that she no longer believes every accusation deserves a full investigation. There is tremendous wisdom in saying, "I know what happened and I am comfortable with my decision." You cannot control what someone chooses to believe about you. You can clarify your truth, but you cannot force another person to accept it. And when you stop spending your energy correcting every distorted version of yourself, something changes. Your attention returns to your own life. That may be what unsettles a manipulative person most. They are no longer controlling the conversation. They are no longer controlling your emotional energy. And they are no longer keeping you busy defending yourself against a story you never agreed to live inside. In final words, sometimes the greatest lesson from a difficult person is discovering how much you have changed. If you have followed this entire discussion, you can probably see that the real story is not simply about how narcissistic people perceive a Sigma female. It is about what happens when a woman becomes more conscious of her choices, her patterns, her boundaries, and the kind of treatment she is willing to accept. Being a Sigma does not mean you are perfect, emotionless, or incapable of making mistakes. It means you are willing to think for yourself, learn from experience, and question patterns that no longer make sense to you. That is why your growth may confuse people who were comfortable with an older version of you. You may forgive differently now. You may communicate differently. You may recognize unhealthy behavior earlier. You may leave situations that you once endured. That is not necessarily becoming cold. Sometimes it is simply becoming wiser. But remember, wisdom should not turn into bitterness. Do not allow one difficult person to convince you that everyone is dangerous. Learn the lesson without becoming imprisoned by the experience. Your greatest strength is not becoming impossible to hurt. It is becoming capable of feeling deeply while still thinking clearly. If you are a Sigma female, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep becoming more honest with yourself. Thank you sincerely for watching. If this topic connected with your experience, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us which point stood out to you most, and subscribe to join our community for more conversations about psychology, independence, relationships, and personal growth. And God bless you.